Hello, and welcome to Michell Consulting's webinar series for our Michell University. Today we're going to be working with SAP Business One, and we're going to be discussing the purchase order process flow. For today's demonstration, we're going to be using SAP Business One version 8.82. So let's talk about some new features that are in the version 8.82. Here in our menu, we have our purchasing in AP. One of the new features is the purchase quotation, which we'll discuss, as well as the procurement process. So again, let's talk about a few features for the purchase quote. SAP now allows you to create a quotation similar to a sales quotation. This allows us to create a quote. These quotes are linked with vendors, and then that purchase quote can be turned into a purchase order. Let's go into inventory and call up an item. We can see here that in our item master, in the old version of SAP Business One, we had one preferred vendor. Now we have the ability of creating multiple vendors for an item. So you'll see this in the purchase quotation. So here we have our preferred vendor, which is all default, is Acme Associates, but we also have vendor Far East Imports and LaserCom. The preferred vendor, or the default, will be used when a purchase order is created. When a purchase quotation is created, we have the ability of selecting these other vendors. And again, that's a new feature here in the item master data under the purchasing tab. So again, for purpose of the demo, we'll go through the process. But as we go through this process, we can understand that we don't have to use all the document within the process. We can start from a purchase quotation, or we can start from a purchase order. We can take the purchase order if we wanted to and go directly to an AP invoice. We can skip that process and go directly to an AP invoice and so on. For purposes here, we're going to go through. We're going to start off with a purchase quotation. We're going to take that purchase quotation. We're going to turn it into a purchase order. At that point, the quantity is on order, so we can see it in the system. We're going to go from the purchase order to a goods receipt PO. We're going to receive merchandise into the system. Receiving merchandise into the system will update the quantity on hand as well as the cost and affect our general ledger in relation to the inventory. We can also then, if we have a problem or we did something in error, we can take the goods receipt PO and we can do a return. We're then going to go into the system, and from the goods receipt PO, we're going to create the AP invoice and so on. So let's talk about the purchase quote. There's a couple ways of doing the purchase quote. We can do it here as a manual purchase quote. So we can start here. We can select our vendor and add our items as we do with other marketing documents. We can do it through the generation wizard, which we'll see later in this presentation. We can also do it from the sales. So we're going to start with the sales, and we're going to create a sales order. And we're going to add some items. And we're going to see here, we're going to use a simple thing. If we go to our logistics tab, we can actually create the quote or the procurement. So we're going to turn that on. We're going to go ahead and we're going to add this sales order. And we're going to go in and generate or activate the procurement process. So you can see here we opened up our window. We can see we have our procurement confirmation wizard that's come up. We can see right now we cannot choose any other customers because we have it set for this customer. We will see later in the demonstration that when you run this process through the purchasing system, you have the ability of selecting many customers, our many business partners. We're going to go through, and again, we have 2 sales orders for this customer. We're going to select the one we just did here. Now we can see a few things. If we go to the item, as we saw here in item number 1, you can see we had our preferred vendor. You can see the default target document is purchase order. So we're creating a purchase order, so what it's going to do, it's going to use the preferred vendor from each one of these items. If we look here, we can see our preferred vendor, which is V1010, which we see here. If we go to item 3, we can see that our preferred vendor is V20,000. Again, you can see it here. If we decide to create the purchase quotation, you now see the item is going to be 3 times. And the reason for that is because if we open up this item, we can see that we have the V10,000, the V1010, and the V20,000. Same holds true with the other 2. We're just using the same vendors for this demo, and so on. So now what we do is we're going to link these in a bundle. We can also, if we're running production, we can also create a production order. So we're going to create the purchase quotation here. And again, we're going to see the link and see how this works in the system. We're just going to click Next. Again, we're going to look at everything here. We're just going to click Next. And we're going to click Next. We're just going to go through the process. And we're going to create the purchase orders. You can see that 3 purchase orders were created. We're going to close. So now if we look at our sales order, and we look at the relationship with the documents, we can see that this sales order has these 3 purchase quotations. And we can see all the business partners involved. So we can do it this way. So now let's go into the purchasing system. And we can see our purchase quotation. We'll also notice here a new feature, which is the link. Because what we've done is now we've linked these 3 purchase quotations. Actually, we have 4 for this one. You can see here that we have, these are all linked together. So purchase quotation 53, 54, 55, and 56 were all linked because they're all based on the same sales order. Because we're quoting, you can see here, because of our setup, we've actually created these. And this is important because what's going to happen is once I do my purchase quote, and I choose one of these, I have the ability of closing the other ones. So we have here, again, we have our information. We can put our unit price in. We can update. We can see the link. We can go ahead and we can choose this one. We can do a copy to. In this case, we're going to copy to a purchase order. And it's going to ask us, since we're using this purchase quotation to decide on our order, it'll ask us, do you want to close the other quotes within the same group? If we say yes, you can see now that we actually created a purchase order for this one. So let's go ahead and let's add that. Let's close and see what the effect is. So now, if we go back to our purchase quotation, we can see that 56 is closed, and that's the one that we copied to. You can see the relationship because we took purchase order 56 and we copied it to purchase order 292. And because of the grouping, we've now closed purchase order purchase quotation 56 because we copied it to a purchase order. But if we look, 55 has also become closed because of that link. 54 has also been closed because of that link. And 53 has also been closed because of that primary group or that link. So in essence, what we can do is we can have the option of leaving those other quotations open, but typically once we send quotations out, we would make a decision on which vendor we want to purchase from, and at that point, we don't have to manually go in and close the other purchase quotes. We can go ahead and close it this way. So you can see what we've done is we've taken that purchase quotation and we've copied it to a purchase order. Let's call our purchase order up. You can see some new features that are in the version 8.8.2. We still have our standard link within the documents, so you can see that this purchase order was based on a quotation 56, which is based on a sales order 311. We have our base and target documents still available in SAP. So if we look here, our base document was the purchase quote. Now we have a new feature that we can right-click in the document and look at the relationship map. The advantage of this is that we get a snapshot of everything involved. You'll see here that I see the purchase order, the purchase quotes, and the sales order. One of the issues with the older version of SAP is that when I was using these documents here, for example, from the purchase order, I have to click on the base document to get the purchase quotation, and then I would have to click again to get the sales order. So my screen becomes very crowded, and I have a lot of windows open. So what we're allowed to do here is now, if we close that, we can simply right-click on the document, look at the relationship map, and we have a snapshot of everything that's involved. You can see all the business partners involved. You can see the customer from the sales order. You can see all the vendors that are involved, as well as the document links. So again, we've created a purchase quotation. We have this item on order. We haven't affected our inventory yet. Since it's a purchase order, there's no effect in general ledger because we haven't actually received merchandise. As we know from SAP, there's two ways to move the documents along the flow. Notice what we're doing here is we started with a purchase quote, and we turn that into a purchase order, and then we want to turn it into a goods receipt, PO, and so on. There's a couple ways of doing that. We can do what's known as the copy to or the copy from. The copy to is a one-to-one relationship that moves the document along the flow. So in this case, our purchase order is our base document, and we're going to copy to our corresponding target document. So we can click goods receipt. So what's happening is we get everything here on the screen coming through. You can see the relation down here of how we want to do that. So we're going from our base document, which is our purchase order, to our target document, which is our goods receipt. We can also use the copy from process. In this case, we would open up our target document first. Let's just get the vendor. So here we have to put our vendor in, so we know where we're coming from. And then the copy from allows us to go to the base. The advantage of the copy from going from the target and pulling from the base is we're, instead of pushing the documents along, we're pulling. The advantage here is that we can create or select more than one purchase order. So we have two purchase orders out here that we can bring in together. And you can see here we open up our wizard, and we can still bring in all the items that we want, or we can choose which items we want to select. So here we can select our individual items, we can change our quantities and so on. We're going to go ahead and bring these two in, And again, it's just telling us that we have different document owners on here, so it's going to choose. So now we can see we have a goods receipt PO with these two. We can add this, and when we add it, we're going to go ahead and make this permanent. We're going to affect our inventory. We're going to increase our quantity, and we're going to go ahead and affect general ledger. So in this case, we're going to debit our inventory and credit our clearing account. Another nice feature that they added in this version of SAP is to do a preview of the journal. So here, what I can do is once I add, I've created the document and created the journal, but I can actually do a preview now and see my effect in general ledger before I actually do it. So you can see here what I'm going to do. I'm going to debit my inventory for the value, and I'm going to credit my goods receipt, not invoice. So I have that ability, and that holds with all documents, purchase and sales, but I can do a preview before I go ahead and do it. Let's just add this. And again, it's telling us since we're adding the document, since we're going to make an effect on general ledger as well as quantity, once we add it, we can't make any changes to it. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And let's look at what we've done. So you can see here we created goods receipt 285. If we look at our effect in accounting, now we have our journal. You can see the actual journal has been created. And we've affected our quantity on hand. And again, if we open up our relationship map, we can follow the entire flow. So you can see here what we've done. You can see here that we started with our sales order. We took our sales order. We have a delivery on one of the orders because we combined two sales orders on these POs. We can see our purchase quotations here. We took our purchase quotations and we turned this purchase quotation into a purchase order. We took these purchase quotations from the other sales order here into that, and we took these two purchase orders and combined them into a goods receipt PO. So the relationship map is a great feature added in SAP because it gives you a nice clean snapshot. You can also, right now we're looking at the marketing documents, you can also look at all related items that were done, as well as all related posting details. Again, so you can see the journal here. So we have that ability here of going through, just moving around. So what we've done now is we've done our goods receipt. Because we've done our goods receipt, and we've gotten that message that once we add this, we can't make any changes to it. Because, again, we've affected our quantity on hand, and we've affected our goods receipt and our general ledger. In this case, if there was an issue, let's say we made a mistake and we received both of these and we shouldn't have, we can also do a return. So, again, we can do the copy to. Remember the relationship. This now, our goods receipt, this is our base document. We want to copy to our target document. In this case, we're going to copy it to a return. We can do it this way. We want to return line 2. We can delete the first one and add it this way, or we can do our copy from. So our goods receipt PO is our base document, and we want to copy to. We want our target document to be the return goods. So we can just go here. Let's go to the return goods. Let's go to our target. And I prefer this way because it allows you to make changes on your lines. So you're going to go here, and you're going to copy from the base, which is a goods receipt PO. This way, I can go in, and I want this line. I don't have to worry about bringing all my lines in and having to delete. And again, we can follow the link. This is a goods return, which is based on a goods receipt, which is based on a purchase order, and so on. So we're just going to go ahead and add this. Again, we're getting the message. We cannot change this document because we're going to affect our quantity on hand, and we're going to affect our general ledger. Again, we can do our preview. We can see the journal, what's going to happen. We're going to reverse this. So we're going to credit our inventory for the $10 and debit our goods received not invoiced. Take a look at that. We're going to go ahead and add this. So we call it back up. You can see that the document is closed. You can look here at accounting and see our effect in general ledger. And again, our document is closed because of the link between this one and the goods receipt. Again, we can right-click, look at our relationship map, and again, we can see the goods receipt created the goods return. If we open up the goods receipt, you can see that line 2 is closed because it's linked to the goods return. And then our final step would be our AP invoice. So we can do the same process. We can combine multiples. So we're going to go in. Let's go to our target document. Let's go to the AP invoice. Put our vendor. Let's do our copy from goods receipts. Set this to item, copy from goods receipt. And again, we're going to grab all 3 of these. I'm going to use our document draw wizard. In this case, we're just going to bring everything in. We're going to combine one AP document. And again, it just tells us that the target document has different owners. We're just going to go ahead and override that because we have ownership. We actually have a webinar on document ownership. You can visit our website and see that, show how you can control ownership of documents and actually restrict who can look at whose documents. It's another nice feature that's in SAP Business One. So again, we can see here, let's just put an invoice number. Let's post it here. And again, we're going to go ahead and add this. Again, because we're adding this document, it's going to create the journal. It's going to affect the inventory. Excuse me, it's going to affect the customer, the vendor's aging, and reverse out the clearing account. We can always go in and do our journal entry preview. And again, we can see the effect. We're going to credit the vendor. We're going to affect the goods receipt not invoice reversal, and in this case, we have sales tax involved. So once we add it, same holds true. We can't change the document once we've added it because what we've done has affected our history. We've affected our vendor aging. You can see here now in the account balance of the vendor. We can see it here. And if we look at our accounting, we can see our effect in accounting. Again, if we right-click and look at the relationship map, we have the link, so we're still good. We have everything involved in this process flow. Again, a very nice feature here. We can see everything at a glance, where we are. We have our AP invoice. And again, if we want to return an item, we can do the same. So let's close that. We can see, let's take our vendor. We can see this is AP invoice 273. Let's go to a credit memo. Let's return one. Say we billed him and one of the items was damaged, so we're going to return it. Take 273. Let's just do this one right here. Again, we're just dealing with exchange rates, and documents will be updated based on the base document, as we can see. And we can see our same vendor reference number. We have our option of looking at the journal preview. You're going to see we're going to credit the inventory, take it out, and do that. One of the things to note in SAP is that if I've done the goods receipt PO, which means I received merchandise, and I haven't done the AP invoice, and the merchandise needs to be taken out of stock, we can do the return goods. Once we've created the AP invoice, because we've affected the vendor's account, and there's a problem with the inventory, we want to return it, we have to do the AP credit memo because we need to affect the vendor since he was affected on the AP invoice. Again, we're getting the message because once we add it, we're affecting. And once again, we can come back and look at our relationship map. And at a glance, we can see everything involved on the screen. So what we've done to recap that flow, we've kind of gone through our flow. We've started with a purchase quotation. We've created a purchase order. The purchase order put the merchandise on order. We haven't affected our inventory. We haven't affected any general ledger. Once the merchandise arrives, we can do a goods receipt PO. The goods receipt PO allows us to go in and receive our merchandise. Since we're affecting our inventory, we're going to affect our inventory and cost of the item. So we need to affect our general ledger from the inventory standpoint, and we're going to use a clearing account until our AP document arrives. If we receive merchandise and there's a problem with the merchandise needs to be returned, we can do the goods return, which will reverse the goods receipt PO. From the goods receipt PO, we then receive the invoice from the vendor. So we take our goods receipt PO and credit our AP invoice. Once the AP invoice is created, if there's issues, we have to do an AP credit because our AP invoice has affected the vendor and the vendor's aging, so we need to do an AP credit to reverse that effect. There's a couple other options. There's an option to do an AP down payment. This allows us like a deposit. So for example, let's say we're doing a purchase order. And let's say we're doing a purchase order here. And for whatever reason, the vendor requires a down payment. So what we want to do is we want to go here into our payment means. And in our payment means, we can actually create a down payment. So they require a little bit here. So let's put a reference. And we're going to give them, let's say, $1,000 as a deposit. We're going to go ahead and click OK. We're going to add this purchase order. And what's happening is we're going to actually create a down payment invoice in the background. The down payment invoice becomes a deposit. We can also do an AP Reserve Invoice. An AP Reserve Invoice allows us to do the accounting side and then do the receiving afterwards. You can see here when we did a purchase order, what happens is we have this purchase order, and this purchase order we did the goods receipt PO. So when we did the goods receipt PO, we've affected the inventory side. If we look at a goods receipt PO and we look at our effect in general ledger, you can see we affected the inventory, so we increased the value of our inventory. And then we have an offsetting credit for the merchandise received that have not been invoiced. When we actually get the AP invoice will reverse this, will debit this, and credit the AP in the vendor's account. And you can see that from our AP invoice. Our accounting effect, again, is going to credit the vendor, which the AP is inside the vendor. So if we look at our vendor, we can see our accounts payable account in the vendor. on the Accounting tab. And we're going to debit or reverse that goods received, not invoice, because now we have the invoice. What the Reserve Invoice allows us to do is to flow kind of in reverse. This is for, like, let's say, a prepayment or something we need to do. So if we have a purchase order, start with a new one. Pick R East. We'll do a simple one with one item. Again, here we're creating a purchase order. We're going to add the purchase order. Notice that when we added the purchase order, it didn't ask us about changing the document because since we've just done a purchase order, we haven't affected any accounting, we haven't affected any inventory. What we can do now is we can do the reverse. We can go from a purchase order, instead of going to the goods receipt, then the AP invoice, we're going to go from the purchase order to the AP invoice using the AP Reserve Invoice, and then later do the goods receipt. So it's like a prepay. We want to affect the vendor and the vendor's agent without affecting our quantity. So we're going to go in and we're going to copy to the AP Reserve Invoice. So what's going to happen here, if we look at our preview of the journal, we're doing the AP side first. We're going to credit our vendor. So it's going to be in our vendor's aging as well as affecting our accounts payable liability account. And we're going to debit the goods receipt. So we're doing the AP side first. So we're going to go ahead and add that. Again, we're going to get the message because once we add this, we're affecting general ledger. So we have not affected our inventory yet. So if we look here at our reserve invoice, again, we can see our quantity. We haven't affected our quantity on hand. It's still in the order information here. And you can see the effect in general ledger. Now we've done our AP side. So we've affected the vendor. It's going to be in the vendor's aging. If we look here at the vendor's account balance, we will see it in here. But we haven't affected our goods receipt yet. And there's a couple reports that we can actually run for this. Because of this, a lot of times when this is done, the AP Reserve Invoice is typically done because of a prepayment or we need to be paid first. We can pay this invoice with a outgoing payment like we would any other AP invoice because we may have to pay the vendor first before the merchandise arrives. So what we can do is we can look in our open order reports. We have a couple features here that we can look at AP Reserve Invoices that are not yet delivered. So if we look here, we see the one we just did. It's not yet been delivered. We can also look at AP Reserve Invoices that are unpaid. So you can see this one's also unpaid. So now we're going to go ahead and pay that real quick. And we can see our reserve invoice here. And we're going to go ahead and pay that. Let's just add that outgoing payment. So we can see now, if we go to our reserve, you can see that the invoice has a status of paid. You can see down here that there's an amount applied, so there's no balance due. Again, we can right-click look at how it was paid. So we can see that it's paid. So if we go back to our reports, we look at AP Reserve Invoices unpaid, we don't have it now. But we still have it as not being delivered yet. So we can see here that we haven't delivered. So again, this is nice, and a lot of times we create alerts for this because we got to make sure that we paid it. Now we pay it, we know that we could be receiving the merchandise. So once the merchandise comes in, we can go to our AP Reserve Invoice, and if we copy to, we're just doing our goods receipt. So we're doing the flow in reverse. We're going from a purchase order to the AP invoice via the Reserve Invoice, and then the goods receipt, as opposed to going from the purchase order to the goods receipt to the AP invoice. So now, again, once we do this, we can look at our journal preview, and we can see now we're going to do the goods received portion. Now we're going to receive it, so we're going to affect our inventory, and we're going to clear off that goods receipt not invoiced account. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So if we close all this, we go back to our AP Reserve Invoice. You can see the status went from paid to close. Again, if we look at the relationship map, we can see that we went from a purchase order to the reserve, to the goods receipt, and we also did the payment in between here. So now if we go back to our report, we can see that it's been delivered. So we have nothing here, not yet delivered, and we have nothing for unpaid. The final thing we're going to discuss this morning is the procurement, two things, the purchase quote generation wizard, as well as the procurement process. The purchase quote allows us to create quotes here as opposed to doing it on a one-to-one relationship. Here, remember when we went in, we're creating the quotation for one vendor. We can also do this from the sales side. Again, that's for one sales order. But what we can do is we can just create purchase quotations via the generation wizard. So we're going to go in here, and we're going to create a new one. We're going to give it a name. So here again, we can select our items. So let's just tab and let's create these 3 items. And again, we're going to create these 3 items. We can put a required date. We can have this go, let's say it's required. We're going to put today's date, valid until. So again, we can do the same here. You can put a required quantity. Let's say we're going to require 50 of these, 50 of each. Again, we're just setting up our quote. I'm going to click Next. And again, we're going to see all the information. Again, you'll know that each one of these, for purpose of the demo, each one of these items, item 1, 2, and 3, you can see that we have multiple vendors in our item. You can see that. We can group by business partner. We can also group by item if we want to do it this way. We can create this as a draft document. So we can, instead of creating the actual quote, we can create a draft of a quote and then go back and change it. We're going to go ahead and just do it as a quote. And again, we have some options. We can execute it, which will actually create the quotes. We can save the parameters that we set and execute it because we may want to do this again. We may have a recurring quote that we need to do for these items. We can also save the parameter set and just exit without executing. So let's just save it and exit. Okay, you can see we created it, but we didn't actually create the quote. So now we can go back in once we get approval. We can just highlight it, click Next. Again, we can make any changes to it if we'd like. And here we're going to again save and execute. And again, we're getting our warning because once we run this, we're actually creating purchase quotations. I'm going to run the process. You can see here that everything was successful. You can see we created purchase quote 57, 58, 59, and 60. All 4 of these were done. So again, if we go to our purchase quotations and we call up our last record, you can see 16. Again, you're seeing that group. Purchase order, purchase quote 59. Again, all 4 of these are tied to the group, as we saw before. If we look at our relationship map, we can look at our purchase quote here and our corresponding vendor. So we can do it that way. We can use our quote generation wizard to create quotes. The other thing is the procurement confirmation wizard. We saw this from the sales side when we were actually in a sales order. You can see that for that sales order or that customer for that sales order, we can create purchase orders or purchase quotes based on that. But we can also do it from the purchasing side. What this allows us to do is select a range of customers or based on other criteria to create purchase orders or purchase quotes. So let's say we've taken a lot of sales orders today. Everything's on back order, and now we want to create the purchase orders for all those sales orders we've taken. Again, this is a new functionality in the version 8.8. So here we can select by going to Add. Again, we can select a range of business partners. We can use our groups on our properties. We're just going to go ahead and select all. Okay, so we can see, again, everybody here. Let's just go and include all sales orders. Again, let's just see some of the people we have. So we'll just take a couple of them. Let's go back. Let's uncheck. And let's do this one and this one. So we're just going to select these 2 customers. We're going to go next. So we're going to see that these 2 customers have sales quotations here. So again, we're going to use that. We can see they have sales orders. So if we look at this one here, we can open up sales order 76 and so on. So you'll see that this is similar to we saw from the sales and AR side, except in the sales and AR was linked directly to that one customer. So here we can do this. We can click Next, and we can do the same thing. We can create a purchase order. We can create purchase quotations here if we want. And if we're running production, we can run any production orders. So let's just go ahead and create a quote. Excuse me, create a purchase order. So I'm going to go ahead. We're going to click Next. Again, we have some consolidation options. If we're dealing with multiple, we want to consolidate by warehouse or by vendors and so on. Just click Next. Again, we can see it here. We have the ability of doing it in a draft form. And you can see that we created purchase order 294. Let's go to our purchase order, go to our last record, and you can see 294, what we created. And if we right-click and look at our relationship map, again, we can see what we've done. So again, we have the information here. So we have a couple ways of creating a purchase order based on sales orders or sales documents. We can do it in the sales as a one-to-one relationship. So as we're doing an order, we can create the purchase quote or the purchase order. Or we can do it from the purchasing system by using the procurement confirmation wizard. The procurement confirmation wizard allows us to create purchase quotes or purchase orders for a range of sales orders. So that concludes our session today on SAP Business One version 8.82, the purchasing process. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our website. So please visit us at www.michellgroup.com. Again, we thank you for your time.